The vastness of space was never silent, not truly. Beneath the hum of the ship, beneath the rhythmic pulse of the guidance systems, there was always something. Faint signals, the echoes of lost transmissions, distortions caught in the gravity wells of dead stars. He had been a pilot long enough to stop listening. The orders were simple. Deliver terms of surrender to the outpost on Solace 12. They would resist, of course, perhaps with words, perhaps with whatever crude defenses they had managed to cobble together in the years since breaking away. It wouldn't matter. The consortium would absorb them. They always did. The pilot had never been a soldier, never fired a weapon in war. He was a diplomat, an envoy, the kind they sent when conquest no longer required fleets. His presence alone would be enough. He charted the course, initiated the burn. Solace 12 lay on the outer edges of map space. The safest route was Long's, weaving past unstable pockets of dark matter, gravitational distortions, and the fractured remains of forgotten moons. But there was another way, shorter, more direct. It was there on the navigation charts, a thin sliver of corridor where the data claimed safe passage. It would shave hours off his approach. He had no reason to doubt the charts, and yet the words came unbidden as he set his trajectory. Stay on the charted lanes, unless you want the sirens to get you. A joke. A warning. He had heard it before, muttered between long-haul pilots and cargo runners in the outer stations. The sirens of deep space. Old signals, rogue frequencies, voices in the void that no ship's black box ever recorded. He dismissed the thought. Adjusted course. Engaged drive. The first sign was the silence. A ship was never silent. Even in the empty places, there was the whisper of data streams, the pulse of life support, the faint vibration of ion thrusters keeping velocity in check. But now, nothing. Not a system error, not an alarm, simply absence. Then the voice, a whisper through the comms, his name. It was faint, almost buried in static, like a half-formed thought slipping through the cracks of his mind. He stiffened, fingers tightening over the controls. It had been weeks since he heard another living voice, repeat transmission. Nothing. He exhaled, slow and steady, too many hours awake. A trick of the mind. He rubbed his temple, tried to shake the fatigue creeping in at the edges of his awareness. You are blind to what you serve. The words curled through the cabin, soft, edged with static. His breath hitched. He checked the external scans. No vessels, no outposts. The automated distress scans showed nothing in range. Turn aside before you are undone. His skin prickled. The ship felt wrong suddenly. The artificial gravity was steady, the air pressure normal, but something had shifted. His chair pressed against his back like an anchor. The air felt thick, heavy. The light from the console seemed dimmer, the colors muted. His hands were shaking. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the whispering didn't stop. It layered upon itself, multiple voices overlapping in a tide of hushed urgency. Not threatening, not pleading, just insistent. There is more at stake than you understand. He squeezed his eyes shut. He needed to focus. This was a stress response, an auditory hallucination. Isolation could do that. He had read the reports. Pilots lost to deep space psychosis, driven mad by the void. It started small, phantom sounds, shadows in the edges of perception, then paranoia. You are not the first. The whispers twisted around him, curling into the silence, into his very thoughts. His fingers hovered over the emergency comms, ready to send a beacon back to the consortium. But what would he say? That space was talking to him, that he was hearing voices from nothing, that he had come untethered. The thought sent ice down his spine. He turned his attention back to the navigation charts. Just reach Solace 12, complete the mission, recalibrate, get some rest. He was still on course, mostly. A slight deviation, a fraction of a degree, his jaw clenched. He realigned, hands steady despite the unease crawling through him. And then, a flicker on the scanner, a gravitational anomaly. No, not just an anomaly. A phantom point of collapse sitting just beyond his intended path, faint, almost imperceptible, a phenomenon the consortium's charts had missed. His blood ran cold. His calculations ran on instinct. He adjusted, accounted for drift, reran the data. If he had continued on his original course, nothing would have been left. No ship, no wreckage, no distress beacon. It was a collapse point, a sink in the fabric of space itself, and he had been aiming straight for it. His breath came shallow, ragged. The sirens, the whispers, he had ignored them, fought against them. But they had not fought him. They had warned him. He leaned back in his chair, hands pressed against his face. He was shaking. You are not the first. Had others come this way? Had they ignored the warnings? Had they fallen into the void, swallowed without trace? Had this been the fate of other envoys before him? Others who had set out to claim Solace 12 for the consortium and never arrived. He sat there, staring at the dark expanse beyond the viewport, feeling for the first time like he was a man on the wrong side of something far older and more deliberate than he could understand. Slowly, carefully, he adjusted course, skirting the edges of the anomaly and realigning himself with the consortium's original star lane. The moment he corrected his trajectory, the whispers ceased. The silence returned, but this time it was different. Lighter, as if something had released him. His proximity scanner chirped. A new signal. Solace 12 was near. The outpost appeared through the viewport, a settlement of structures, rising in jagged silhouettes against the planet's barren surface. The buildings were stark and unassuming, functional rather than grand, but there was something unsettling in their stillness. He activated the atmospheric scans, confirming what he already knew. The planet was habitable, just barely. As he descended, he saw movement. Small figures gathering in the open spaces between the buildings, standing in loose formations. They did not scatter at the sight of his ship. They did not send warnings or hails or distress beacons. They simply watched. His landing gear settled into the dirt with a muted thud. Inside the cockpit, his hands hovered over the controls. He hesitated. Something about this place, about the way the figures below waited with silent expectancy, unsettled him more than the voices ever had. Finally, he stood, straightened his uniform, and exited the ship. The air outside was thin, tinged with something metallic. The landscape stretched into empty plains, a horizon of dust and rock. The outpost structures loomed in clusters, sturdy yet unadorned, as if they had been carved from the very bones of the planet. A lone figure approached, an elder wrapped in layered robes that fluttered slightly in the dry wind. Their face was unreadable, their eyes deep and knowing. The pilot opened his mouth to speak, to declare his purpose, to begin the negotiations. But no words came. The official phrases, the carefully prepared lines about compliance and surrender felt hollow. You have seen beyond yourself, the elder said. The pilot said nothing. The wind stirred the dust. The outpost waited. Somewhere in the vast quiet of deep space, the voices had gone silent.